Hello friends, welcome to week 5 of the Bloom Along. We're finally heading into starting to do our curves. Okay, if you're newer to curves, and I talk about this later in this tutorial, just take your time with them. I show you a couple different tips and tricks. And also, if you haven't done it, there's a 2-hour pre-recorded workshop in the Sew Squad called Curves Are Fun. It includes templates, and you can work on that before you cut up your good fabric to do your quarter curves, okay? But they shouldn't be too difficult. They are fun. And once you learn this skill, like, it is a fantastic skill to have. There's so many quilts out there now that, especially right now, it seems to be on trend to have curves in your quilt patterns. So this is a handy skill to have, all right? I'll take you through it. If you've got questions, don't worry, just take your time. We'll gather together this week and address all your concerns or questions or issues, and I will be cheering you on. Remember, finished is better than perfect, right? All right, let's go. Okay, friends, it is time to start working on our curves. And we're going to start with the quarter curves, big and small, okay? I recommend, if you're new to curves, there is a whole on-demand workshop called Curves Are Fun. And it's here in the Sew Squad, and it's free. You can watch that, practice a bit. And I'll be going over the same things in this video as I went over in that whole 2-hour workshop, okay? So let's start with pulling out our fabrics. I need a number 1 and a 9 for a large quarter curve, and then a small quarter curve. Oh, that's 12. Let's do a 12 and a 10. This is the fun part about using these plates. It's easy to find what you need. There we go. These are our example curves, okay? So the large ones are a little bit easier to deal with than the small ones, just because the small are a little more fiddly, but overall curves are not too complicated to do. Because I'm working on the large size, I want my large curves to measure 8.5 inches once they're put together. I want these little ones to measure 4.5 inches when they're put together. If you're working on the medium, this should be 6.5 inches. This should be 3.5 inches, okay? So let's start with this large one. I have already ironed this in half. You can also just fold it in half and pinch the corner here. This is our center point, and that we want to register with this, okay? So I've done the same with this. I folded this in half, and I've just pressed it so that I've got a nice crease that I can line these up, okay? I'm lining up the top and putting a pin right here. Now you've got 2 options, as are covered in the Curves Are Fun workshop. The first option is to pin this piece onto this piece. The second option is to use a glue stick. I encourage you to try both options and see what you like better. I like the glue because there is no shifting. Once you get everything to your machine, everything stays perfectly in place. But let's start with pins, because some people just prefer pins, and that's cool too. I've got my center. Then I will do the ends, okay? And then I'll do the other end. All right. Get that into place. Well, that's not exactly perfect. There, all right. And then you add as many or a few pins as you would like to hold everything in place, okay? This top piece has a little bit of give to it, so you can kind of stretch it a little bit around to make it fit if you need to, but you shouldn't have to do that too much. This is the same piece that you'll be working with when you're doing the orange peels, but with orange peels, you're adding 2 of these on, one on either side of the peel. Yeah, but with the quarter curves, you're only doing 1. So see, I'm just adding pins all along here. Some people only put in 3 pins and then they just work the fabrics together as they sew. That's up to you. There's so many different techniques for doing curves. They're really fun to do once you get used to them, and they look amazing in quilts. It just adds a whole other skill set to your quilty toolbox. Okay, so this one is done like this. All right, and then I would sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around and press this outwards and press this piece towards the outside. Okay, the other option is to use glue. So let me show you the glue method. You're going to keep that, oh, I took it out. You're going to keep the center pin where the crease is, okay? And then with a glue stick, it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be any kind of glue stick. You don't necessarily have to. You can get specialty glue sticks for sewing. This is just an Elmer's school glue stick. Okay, and you're just going to run a thin line of glue along the edge. It will not gum up your machine because it's such a thin layer. By the time you get it glued, it'll all dry. Plus, I like to do a whole stack of these at once. So I'll sit, watch something, or listen to a podcast, do a whole stack of these, and then take them to my machine and sew them, okay? So you can see with this one, I may have pulled my outer piece a little bit and it's hanging over the edge, and that's fine. Once I iron this out, I'll trim off this excess, okay? But don't pull this too hard. Maybe I've pulled a little too hard. Let's do this side. Okay. Everything should fit. All right, and that's it. It's dried within seconds. It's ready to go under your machine. Like so, okay? And the thing I love about glue is that that fabric is stuck together. It's not gonna shift anywhere. You can put it through your machine and it'll be just fine. Okay, so that's the large curve. I'll show you what it looks like sewn, but first let's do the little curve. So here's the small one. Again, I have ironed down the center. I'm going to take this little piece here, line it up. You want to make sure that those 2 points are in line as well so that it's not off kilter like this, right? So line it up nicely. And again, same thing, pin in the center and then choose whether you want to pin or glue based, okay? So I'll glue base this one again because that's what I prefer. And I just do one side at a time. So this is why I do recommend, if you're newer to this process, making the large version of the Bloem quilt is a little easier, because when you're doing the medium size, these are 3.5 inches, so they're even teenier. And I just find when you're newer to quilting, bigger pieces in general are just easier to sew and put together and a little less fiddly. But if you chose the smaller quilt, that's cool. Either way, okay? All right, so that one's ready to go. Okay, so we'll sew these up and then I will show you what they look like all ironed and pressed. Here are our quarter curves. They are pieced and they are ironed, but I want to go over something first. Let's talk about ironing these, because there is one situation where you want to iron some of the seams towards the curve, okay? That situation is when you're making these fun blocks here, A2, B1 for Bloem 1. For Bloem 2, it's C2 and B3. So these look like those circles. They look like inset circles, but they're actually made up of quarter curves. To make the most of those blocks, you have to make a whole stack of them, right? To make them all fit together really nicely, and again, to like make sure that the seam ends up lined up with that whole circle, you want to iron half of them with the seam going towards the outside piece. And then the other half of your stack, you're going to iron the seam towards the inside. So you can see here that what I've done also, I've just clipped a tiny amount, like 1/8 of an inch along here, so that I could iron towards the curved piece, okay? And then this one doesn't require any clipping, you're just pressing outwards. But what I would do when I'm pressing, because these can get kind of distorted, so press straight down, don't use too much steam. And before you press, I encourage you to just finger press right into the seam allowance, okay? So you're maximizing the seam allowance, and you're keeping this nice and straight. Otherwise, you may get this wonky sort of thing happening. You can see it happened here on this one because of the extra piece, which I'm trimming off anyway. Okay, but just finger press right in there. For these ones, you'll take this and you're just clipping. Right? These are not my best clipping scissors. These are my paper scissors. Surprisingly, they are still cutting my fabric. Okay, so we're gonna clip along here. And then you'll press these ones toward this seam. So half your stack, specifically for that block, you're ironing half towards this quarter curve and half away from the quarter curve. All right. Then this is what happens. You pair them up. And then that way, again, you're nesting seams, right? So we'll zoom in. I've got one where the seam is pressed towards the outer piece. It's pairing up with this one where the seam is ironed towards the inner piece. Right? There's the outer, there's the inner, there's the outer. And so again, I'll be able to nest those seams like this. I haven't trimmed these, so they're a little wonky looking. But again, I'm nesting the seam here. And then I'm going to do the same with the set down here. So this one, the seam is going out. So this one, I want to have the seam that goes in. And this one, I want to have the seam that goes out. Find one that's trimmed, okay? So that all the way around, you can end up lining up that seam and nesting them together and ending up with a really nice circle, okay? So I pair them like this, and then you'll be able to nest these two and these two. And I will show you how to do that when we do the whole putting all the quadrants together, or the smaller blocks with the 4 units. We do that later on. Week 7, we'll deal with that in week 7. But for now, specifically for this block, take half your stack and iron in opposite directions, okay? Now let's talk about trimming these down, because like I said, I have not trimmed any of these. So here's what size they should look like, and here's how you should trim your quarter curves. When I'm doing these little ones, this one, because I'm doing the large size, it should measure 4.5 inches. If I was doing the medium size, it should measure 3.5 inches. If it's larger than that, and some of you are using templates where the outer pieces are bigger, that means you just trim these 2 sides. So mine might already be fairly accurate because I don't have any extra on this outer piece. But what I would do, this should measure 4.5 by 4.5. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. It's exact for me. If it's not exact for you, if you need to trim down, you only trim this outer side. Don't trim this curved side, okay? You're just trimming from those sides for all your quarter curves, okay? Same goes for this one. Let's have a look at it. Mine again is pretty exact. Yeah, so I don't need to trim anything. But if you do, just trim the sides on this outer piece. Okay, and then for this one should measure 8.5 inches or 6.5 inches if you're doing the medium. So I'll just use this larger ruler, set this down. Again, it's pretty exact. So coming up, yeah, it's okay. But these little ends here, right, that have gone over. So I'll take this, use my rotary, and trim. All right, do the same to the other side, trim off that little excess tail. Okay, and do that for all your curves so that they have nice flat squares. You can see all of these have these little bits of overhangs, and that's just not going to do. So I'll have to go through this little stack and at the very least square these up, trim off this edge. Okay, that's it, folks. That's your quarter curves. There are lots of them to do. Take your time, take breaks, do these in stages. Again, use your quadrant layout. Look at all the blocks that you need to make curves for, and maybe just tackle like this for these 2 blocks here, the circles. I did those in one day. That's all I dealt with, was just piecing those together, or just basting. Actually, one day, the next day I sewed them, the next day I ironed. Now I'm going to trim them. And then for your larger ones, you know, find those. You've only got a few on the Bloem 1. On Bloem 2, you've got quite a few more. So that's up to you. Just pace yourself, do a few every day, check them off your list as you go. As always, curves are fun. They are fun, and they look very cool. All right, that's it. If you've got questions, put them in the comments below or save them for our check-in. And happy curve sewing. And don't forget to check out that free workshop, the Curves Are Fun workshop, which is in the Sew Squad, because it's full of all kinds of little nuggets of information. All right, over and out.